Hey, and welcome back to the second part in my Demystifying the Modes video series of guitar lessons. In the first installment, we talked about an introduction to modes, what they are, naming them, and so on and so forth. Kind of gave an introduction as to how I was going to go about approaching teaching them. And we also talked about the Ionian and Aeolian modes. Now, I'm not going to go too much into detail of what I went through there. You can go back and the link will be in the description below to go watch that video if you want to take that one in. Today we're going to move into Dorian and Lydian, and those are the pair we're going to lump together today, and you'll see why once we get into it. So if you remember, a quick brief review of what we talked about in the first video of this series. We talked about using the pentatonic scale as sort of the framework to base our modal playing off of, which I find makes it much easier to know. Rather than learning each mode as an individual scale, we can take something that we're already very comfortable, or most players are comfortable, which would be the pentatonic scale, major or minor. We discussed that in the first video. And we can simply take those 5 notes we already know and add the other notes that are going to, I guess, like I mentioned, modalize it and give us different tonalities to work around, okay? So, like I said, we talked about in the first video adding the notes, and again, I'm going to be talking about C major pentatonic and A minor pentatonic, right? So if we take our A minor pentatonic scale, played over an A minor chord, if we take that same scale and play it over a C major, it's now a C major pentatonic, right? And what we talked about is to make that into either Ionian or Aeolian, we would add the notes F and B in whatever octave we're in, right? So like I was mentioning before, as a quick recap, we could take any of the scales, scale patterns, and add all the B's in, right? Right? Or add the F's in. Right? And that would make it either Ionian if we were playing it over top of a C major scale, or Aeolian if we're playing it over top of an A minor chord. If I said scale, I meant chord. Okay. So, having said that, well, how do we figure out other notes to start utilizing other modes? Well, like I said, we're going to talk about Dorian and Lydian. You might say, well, why are you pairing those up together? Well, let's take a look at just Dorian for now. So Dorian would be one of the minor modes, okay? So if we wanted to use, sticking with the same chords, you know, playing over top of an A minor chord, and we wanted to utilize Dorian. Well, how do we do that? Well, first we have to understand where the Dorian scale comes from, where its parent scale is. Now, Dorian is mode number 2, okay? So that means it would be the second note, or in this case, we want A as our target, root note, right? A would have to be the second note of whatever the parent scale is, because it's mode 2. So if we take a G major scale, we notice that the second note of G major is going to be an A, right? If we play the G major scale and start it and end it on A, we're really playing the Dorian mode, A Dorian, right? But again, that's kind of the old way of thinking about it, or the way that's oftentimes taught, but I'm trying to steer away from that. We want to take our framework of pentatonic minor, in this case, for Dorian, and just figure out what notes we can add to that framework that we already know. So let's explore the key of G major then, because we said, well, A Dorian comes from G major. So if we take a normal Aeolian mode like we talked about last time, right? We started with our pentatonic, it was A, C, D, E, G, A, and we added our B's and our F's in it. So an Aeolian or A minor scale would be the notes A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Back to A. Pretty simple, right? If we know our alphabet, we know that. So we discussed that last time, but we want to make it Dorian. Well, if we go to the key of G major, which is the parent scale of A Dorian, which is what we're trying to figure out, we quickly notice that that key has 1 sharp, and that sharp's going to fall on an F sharp, okay? So really, if we spell those notes out starting and ending on A, since we're trying to make it Dorian, the notes are simply A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G. Okay, so really if we think about that, then the only note that's different than what we already have in our pentatonic, or the only two notes, are B and F sharp. So this brings up a really interesting little situation. Last time in discussing Ionian and Aeolian, we said, well, we practiced the scales by adding all the F notes in with the pentatonic scale, and then we practice it again adding all the B notes in, right? And again, just go back and check that video and you'll see why I'm saying what I'm saying here about it. So in this case, well, we've already taken care of the B, which would also be part of Dorian. So the B is from Dorian, but it's also from Aeolian. So it's not going to be a real definitive note in the sound of modalizing our pentatonics without the other pitch, right? So in the case of Aeolian, we said, well, we add F. Well, all we can do now is take all those Fs we added to the pentatonic, change them to F sharp, and if we add that note in while we're playing over an A minor chord, it's going to have the sound of Dorian, okay? I have a little loop set up after with an simple A minor to C major chord progression switch. I'm going to give you some examples of how these sound, okay? And you can kind of tune your ear into the difference in the sound of them, okay? But I'll do that after a little bit more of an explanation here. So basically, in a nutshell, we can take our A minor pentatonic scale and add all the F sharps into it. Or add it up here. Right? And that's going to Dorianize what we already know. So if we're playing something typical pentatonic and we want to colorize it to sound more Dorian, anytime I just add the F sharp note in, it's going to automatically make that sound more Dorian. I can also add those Bs in, right? And the B and the F sharp used together are going to make it sound Dorian. Now, obviously, if we add both of those in, we are just playing a G major scale or an E minor scale, however you want to look at it, right? But by thinking of it, within what we already know and are very comfortable with our pentatonic scale, it's going to be very simple to just throw it in whenever we feel it's musically appropriate. So just like we did before now, if we know we have to take our A minor pentatonic and add Bs and F sharps, well, we already did the Bs. That was in the previous video. So I'm not going to sit here and run you through those again. So really, the only new information we need to make this Dorian is by simply going through all of our scale patterns and adding the F sharps. So here was our first pattern for pentatonic. Well, now we can simply go here. And add those F sharps right there, okay? In the next pattern, our root pattern, it would be this. Or we could also add the F sharp up here, but that's going to be covered in the next pattern. So the next pattern, we would be doing this. Adding those two F sharps in, okay? The next pattern would be this. Okay, and the final pattern would be this. Okay, and again, those would continue up in the next octave like we discussed before. Okay, so once we know that, and by practicing only adding that F sharp in, we tune our ear in, like I talked about in the first video, to the sound of just adding that one in, right? Okay, so that would be basically Dorianizing our A minor pentatonic scale. say, in the beginning I mentioned Dorian and Lydian. You say, well, where does Lydian fall into all this? Well, the beauty of this is, we talked in the first video about, you know, A minor pentatonic being the same as C major pentatonic, just when it's played over top of a C major chord. Well, what happens if we play this same A Dorian mode over the C major scale? Well, it actually becomes Lydian, and there's a good reason for that. If we go back to the parent scale, G major, which was the parent scale of A Dorian, the fourth mode is Lydian. So if we go through the notes of G major, we go G, A, B, C. So the fourth note of G major is C. Therefore, the G major is not only the parent scale of A Dorian, it's also the parent scale of C Lydian, right? So that means that if I go to my pentatonic scales that we just learned, add those F sharps in, but play it over top of a C major 7th chord, it's going to have a Lydian sound instead of a Dorian sound, okay? So we don't have to learn any new patterns. All these ones that we just did where I said, okay, let's go in and add the F sharp. If we just start that on C, it's going to give us a Lydian sound. So we're getting double use out of all of these, okay? And that's the beauty of this. By adding one note to our pentatonic scales we're already comfortable with, in this case the F sharp, that's going to give us the sound of either Dorian if we're playing over top of a A minor chord, or if we're playing over top of a C major chord, it's going to give us a sound of Lydian, just by adding those notes, any of those F sharps, into our pentatonic. Okay, obviously the B as well, but we've already discussed that. So the B note is going to allow us to use Ionian, Aeolian, Dorian, and Lydian. But what's going to really define that is, in this case, whether we have the F in there. If we use the F, it's going to make it more Aeolian or Ionian, depending on whether we're playing over A minor or C major. If we move that up to F sharp, it's going to be Dorian or Lydian. And it's really that simple. So I've got a loop here. Let me just put it on. Okay, so it starts on A minor, goes to C major. Okay, let me just play pentatonic over that first, just so you hear how it works. Now, you probably heard there, I threw the B note in, added a color to it, right? Watch when the chord changes. Notice how that took on a totally different... When it's done over the C major, it's a 7th, right? But over the A minor, it becomes a 9th. Okay, so we get what pentatonic sounds like. We also understand that adding that B in, which could either be from Ionian Aeolian or Dorian Lydian. Well, let's go back to the previous lesson where I didn't really get to demonstrate it all that much. What if I add the F note in to really make it sound Ionian or Aeolian? So those Fs could be here. That's going to have a lot of kind of tension to it, right, if you hear it. All right, so we want to be careful about that note over these chords, but notice when I land on it, it's a kind of thing we want to use more in passing. Always resolve it back to maybe a chord tone. Okay, you get the idea. Now, what happens when we take that? We can still keep our B's in there. And we change that F to an F sharp. It's going to turn it into the sound of Dorian when I'm over my A minor chord. And when I'm over my C, it's going to be Lydian. Let's just listen to how that sounds as the chord changes. So here's our A minor. There's your sound of Dorian. There's your sound of Lydian. Now, it sounds like there's a lot of tension there, but you can see how this can be sprinkled in nicely. Okay, so you get the idea with that. You can hear the different tonalities. So again, if you want the sound of Ionian Aeolian, Dorian, and Lydian. And so on and so forth. Okay, you're probably sick and tired of hearing that. But, so you really see, I'm using my pentatonics as a framework, and then I'm just deciding if I'm going to go after that Aeolian, Ionian sound. I'm going to be able to add my F's and B's in wherever I want, wherever they may be. And if I want it to sound more Dorian Lydian, depending on which chord I'm playing over top of, I'm going to add my F sharps and B's in, right? So the B being a little more neutral, kind of works nicely everywhere. The F creates a funny tension. We want to be careful with that. It's almost kind of an avoid note, but if we do it just in passing, it's not so bad. But the Dorian, the F sharp, really gives an interesting sound. So the more we practice the scales, isolating, just adding those particular notes in, the more in tune our ear is going to become to those, and we're going to learn instinctively where we can put them within a particular solo, or if we want to use one of those notes in a particular situation, or if there maybe would be another choice. But the more we practice it and the more we get that sound in our ear, the more we're going to be able to make those decisions in a successful manner. So I hope that was clear, everybody. Again, I'm going to have a very simple little download package up with those scale patterns up on my website for anybody who's interested. Like I said in the other video, please watch the first video. A lot of stuff I said in here may not make all that much sense if you haven't already watched the other video. But we want to go through and learn all of our 5 pentatonic patterns, then learn them all with just the B's, right? And then go through and learn them all with just the F's, and then just with all the F sharps. And that way there, we're going to be able to pick and choose when we want to throw those in. Our ear is going to be more tuned into the sound of when we use those, and we're going to be able to probably use them in a much more successful manner. So I hope that is clear. There's a lot of information there. Feel free to go back and rewatch the video. I will have that download package available up on my website. And feel free to grab that. And I will be back again with another in this series where we talk about 2 more modes, the final 2 modes that we're going to be dealing with, which will be Phrygian and Mixolydian, okay? As I mentioned before, Locrian's not going to really be part of this series because it doesn't fall into that typical major-minor tonality. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Please share the video, like it, subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the kind words and the support, and I really hope this is helping some people to think differently about this topic and can help expand your playing to new areas. All right. I'll be back soon with some more, and thank you so much for tuning in, and ciao for now. We'll talk soon.